All right, well, welcome to the second panel, everyone. And there's nothing like a deadline to spur along the discussion, but we'll get through a few questions anyway. Kim, could I start with you? Because we're going to be talking a little bit about the economy and business, as well as the ocean. Could I ask for you, like, I've been to Lyttelton. It's a beautiful spot. It's a very busy harbor. There's a lot of operational things going on. There's a lot of work going on amongst the workers. How do you maintain that balance between being a business that's thriving operationally, there's many things to think about, but also considering the environment, and particularly, obviously, the marine environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually one that I grapple with a lot, because that's essentially my role. But maybe to answer it, I can give you an example of something that happened a couple of weeks ago, where you're quite right, it's really busy at Lyttelton, and basically the container terminal is going flat out all of the time, and they're hugely focused on productivity. But when I got to work a couple of weeks ago, the terminal team said to me, "Oh, did you realise we had to shut the terminal yesterday and for a seabird?" And I said, "What?" Because the terminal never shuts. And basically, they had a situation where a seabird landed in the container terminal whilst operations were fully underway. The ship was being unloaded, and all the straddles, which if you've ever seen them, they're about machines that are about 3 stories high, and there's about 20 of them that sort of zoom around the whole port. So somebody who was driving a straddle looked down and saw a seabird had landed in basically the middle of the terminal, and radioed back to the control tower, who said, "Right, stop, shut the terminal." And they sent out a couple of people in a ute and basically rescued the bird and moved it away. And I think, so in answer to your question, I think it's easy in a lot of ways, because people just really naturally connect in that environment, and they genuinely want to behave as a kaitiaki, and that makes it my job a pleasure. But to get to that point, we've put a lot into the communication and the understanding of the environment, which is based on a lot of the data and research that we have. So we're able to share that, and then people's experience being on site creates that connection.
That's great, thank you. Kypros, I was really interested in your story and the long history that you've had with the ocean and things. I'm wondering if you could comment just on the sustainability of fishing going forward, and what you think about that for the future of the industry.
In New Zealand, we've got probably one of the best systems in the world how to maintain the fish stocks alive. The system we've got is the TSE, total allowable catch, and then as combined we've got the ITQ system, that we've got the visual transferable code. If the stocks somehow they're suffering, the government will jump in, cut the TSE, and then in proportion, the companies they will suffer a percentage of their ITQ. Now, if the stocks they are healthy, the government it will increase the TSE, and the companies will get the benefit of that increase. Now, as far as this, the fish, and we always talk about problems. There are solutions to the problems, but how do you take the solution, or you go to the government, and you tell them what you believe it should happen, but nobody wants to listen to you. The best way to keep the fish stocks in New Zealand healthy is to actually farm the sea. And we have seen it, where they farm the power, Amarone, very successful, and some other fisheries. That we, as a nation, we can farm the fish and release it out to the ocean and use the ocean as a fish farm. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any thoughts or reactions to that? Olga, have you got any thoughts? No? I'm curious as for you then, just with microplastics and plastics in general, what are some things that we could do to be encouraging the companies that are producing these things to be reducing them?
so just general plastics overall. Can you speak up, please? Is that okay? Is that working? A bit closer? We need to stop using things that aren't essential. There is so much plastic out there that's not essential, and this includes clothing. I don't know. It's quite hard. It's such an integral part of our lives now. From fisheries to our clothes, we have to tackle the bits that we can, but everybody has a role to play in this. Corporations have a massive role too, but if people can start to make those decisions and be aware of what it is they're using and what happens to it, where it goes, and how it was produced in the first place, because the impacts of plastics on our whole environment starts at the very beginning in its creation and all the way through to the end of its life as well. So the more people understand the impacts of the plastic all the way through its life, I think it's going to make a real difference. Being informed is so important, and especially with the bioplastics thing. There are a lot of people who really, really want to do the right thing and are inadvertently doing the worst thing possible. But with people speaking about it and true, proper, decent alternatives coming out there, it's going to help, change things.
That's great, thank you, and that's a beautiful segue. I'm really curious about you because you represent an entrepreneur who started a business, has a startup doing something here. Could you just talk to us about, I guess, the potential for the ocean when you look at it? Because you're harnessing a product that's already there. Could you reflect on that for us and what the industry might look like in the future?
For sure. So for us, one thing I probably didn't make really clear in my presentation is that for us, our source of seaweed in the long term is farmed seaweed. At the moment, there is quite a bit of industry internationally that does rely on wild harvesting, but that's in very different areas where they do have really, really big beds of kelp which they can harvest sustainably. So, for example, off the coast of California, there's just as far as the eye can see. But with New Zealand's topography and quite sharp drop-offs under our coastline, you just don't have that shallow water where you get those really large kelp beds growing. So for us, farming is the goal. And it's kind of peculiar that New Zealand doesn't already have a seaweed aquaculture industry, because elsewhere in the world it is really, really big and incredibly valuable. And we already have quite a well-established sort of aquacultural tradition elsewhere with the likes of greenlet mussels and salmon, and we've heard about a few other things tonight. I think that without a doubt, seaweed farming is going to be the next big step. It's going to happen really, it's already happening. The sort of upward ramping is already underway. And when it does happen, it is going to be the biggest, without a doubt, the biggest thing to happen to New Zealand's aquaculture industry since the introduction of greenlet mussels like 50 years ago. And I think it's going to lead to some really, really exciting things and a whole heap of doors which are going to be opened for us as a country, which we probably can't even imagine at the moment. So really exciting stuff ahead, I think.
Kypros, I'm really curious in your opinion on something. We have an entrepreneur here who's in his 20s, and you shared that you're in your 70s. What advice would you give to someone like this, who's starting out their career in the same industry? And I'm really curious because when you retired, you said you had a bit of a shift of focus. Could you just give some advice across the table here?
Jack, as I said to you before, I congratulate you, and I admire you, and I like to have a fair talks with you. Your ambition is one that I used to have myself. As a young man, younger than you, I had the ambition to be successful. And when I tell people that I never work for money, I only work for success, they cannot understand it. So the only thing, the only advice I will give you is to work, use your brain for success, and the money is a byproduct of your success. So keep going. I'm 100% sure you will do a very good job, and I think you will get 100% of the country behind you.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the times, and I'm looking back at James in terms of, I know the library voice is going to come on soon. Is there any other questions that we wanted to ask this panel? I know there's the Slido, but I can't really see it very well at the moment, and I think we've asked these top ones. Do we have any questions from the audience there? Yep. Rob?
There's a lot of discussion about regenerative agriculture going on right now, but it's focusing just on what's happening on the land without the integration of what goes down the rivers, winds up in the sea. And I'm wondering, I really harken back to that photograph at the start of the presentation that was from a satellite all above New Zealand where you can see. And I think we, rather than doing siloed bits, we need to start looking at a holistic program, because what happens out Garfield Way affects the water of Christchurch. What happens that there goes down the river high on the Wairarapa Ferry into the ocean and down to the Ross Sea. And we just need to start looking at it in a more holistic kind of focus. I know that it's a simple thing to say, and I know the water goes to, it seems so obvious, but we seem to be looking at it in pieces rather than the whole picture. So,
yeah, that's a great question. Just to summarize for the people watching, because they may not have heard the audio, basically the question is about regenerative economy is talked about a lot, but in the context of the land. And actually, what happens on the land affects the ocean, because what goes into the rivers ends up in the ocean. Would any of you like to comment on that, or have some thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, I entirely agree that there needs to be a broader systematic approach, and I can just share some experiences from working within the Whakaora program, which has endeavoured to do just that. Ki to Katai, from the mountains to the sea, is the approach that program has taken. It is mana whenua led, and so it has the integration of Mātauranga Māori and also a lot of science investment. So that was done very deliberately to give it the best chance of success and looking at things from a much more systematic approach. So yeah, I can only say that I agree entirely that that's the future of things.
the minister's not still here, is she?
What's that, sorry?
The minister is not still here, is she?
Sure. But I think it harkens back to this idea of a holistic view, doesn't it? That's the key here. You can't divorce something. You can't say, well, what happens there is one thing and what happens here is the other. Because if there's nothing else we've learned, it's that we're all interconnected, and what we do here affects there. And the reality is that too often we've focused on our own individual gain rather than thinking about the next generation and those coming. So, yeah. Did anybody else have a comment on that around the holistic side? Olga or Jack? Or? Yeah. Miranda, you had a question?
So following from that, do you think there should be better investment in data science and sharing of data science around the seas? I mean, an example being with the Fukushima disaster and the impact it's had on seas beyond Japan. It'd be really great if we could get more collaboration and probably investment in data science, getting maybe scholarships, I guess, for young data scientists to focus on the seas so that we have that sharing of intel that would help the Pacific and beyond.
Yeah, so the question is about data sciences and whether we can have more collaboration and sharing, and thinking about the Fukushima incident. I was actually living in Japan when that happened, and it was pretty scary, but could we actually learn from each other? Could we share knowledge and grow? Does anybody have thoughts they'd like to share on that question or comment? I think we agree. There should be more. Yeah. But it is an interesting point. If there's, particularly in this context where there's private enterprise who are focused on things, to what extent could we share more openly with each other as well, and learn from each other in a more holistic way. So I know there's going to be more questions, but unfortunately the Tūranga lady has already started saying we have 5 minutes to leave. So I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists. I realize we kind of ran through that quickly, but we really appreciated your insights. And I think this thing that stands out to me is some advice that we got between generations here. So could we have a quick round of applause for our panelists? All right, so we are wrapping up. James, do you want to say anything? Yep. You can have a seat if you want. Thank you so much, everybody who came out. If you haven't done it already, on the table in the back right corner, there's some information about Blue Cradle. So maybe as you walk out, go via there, and you can find that out. But thank you, James, for organizing this. It's been such a great evening of depth and such a variety of perspectives. So we really appreciate you pulling it together. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, panelists, for joining us tonight. Thank you, audience. Thank you, those who are watching us online. This is just the beginning, and I think I can end with these words by Sylvia Earle. How much of the ocean do you think we should protect? All of it. We should protect all of it, because it's not about 30% or 10% or whether we need to work out marine spatial plans or whatever. We need to protect all of it. Our life depends on it. Voilà. Woo! And I will now end just with the film that I did at Impact 4 in Chile in 2017. So I'll let you enjoy that. Just to end.
Our ocean is facing a number of huge challenges, unprecedented, from overfishing to plastic pollution to the impacts of climate change, causing the collapse of entire ecosystems.
All too often we're disconnected to the ocean, yet we rely so heavily on the ocean for our well-being.
Es evidente que debemos cambiar la forma en la cual estamos a gran escala tratando el mar, porque todo el mundo que depende del mar como una fuente de alimentos, como fuente de conocimiento y también como fuente de valores culturales importantes y trascendentes para la sociedad, creo que estamos en el camino correcto.
Un congrès comme on est aujourd'hui à l'Impact 4 sont très importants parce que c'est le moment où toute la communauté de techniciens, de direction, de ministres parle de l'importance des aires marines protégées.
Marine protected areas is one of our lost hopes to come back to something that we can call a live ocean.
So the strategy for marine protected areas is to protect areas which can act as refuges, can support the migration of species, and thereby make sure that we have a resilient marine system for the benefit of life and ourselves.
Implementation of marine protected areas needs to go beyond drawing simple lines on maps. What really matters is the effectiveness of management, how we engage local communities, how we work together.
We have the power to change our attitude, to change our behavior, to take actions that can protect the very nature of the planet that keeps us alive.
Hoy día estamos en un momento histórico y desafío histórico, en donde el mundo puede elegir si es que pone en jaque el futuro de sus hijos y los ecosistemas que sustentan el mundo o enfrenta estos problemas.
And if you are a young professional, get involved, join the young professional group of the World Commission on Protected Area and help us shape this global network of change makers, because we know what to do. All we need is action, and we need to act now.